The stagecoach rattled into St. Joseph, Missouri on a blistering August afternoon in 1873, carrying Delilah Ashford and all her worldly possessions tucked inside two worn leather trunks. And when she stepped onto the dusty street, squinting against the harsh sunlight, she wondered if this place would finally let her disappear into the anonymity she desperately craved. The town stretched before her in shades of brown and gray, wooden buildings lining the main thoroughfare like crooked teeth. Horses stood tethered to hitching posts, their tails swishing at flies. A few townspeople wandered past, casting curious glances her way before moving on with their business. Delilah pulled her shawl tighter despite the heat, a habit born from months of wanting to make herself smaller, less noticeable. She had come west after the scandal in Philadelphia, after the whispers had grown too loud to ignore. Her engagement to Marcus Pemberton had ended in spectacular fashion when she discovered him in a compromising position with her cousin. The society pages had delighted in her humiliation, and her parents had suggested, in their coldest voices, that perhaps a change of scenery would benefit everyone involved. Her Aunt Martha owned a boarding house in St. Joseph, and Delilah had seized the opportunity to flee. The boarding house stood at the edge of town, a two-story structure with peeling white paint and a sagging front porch. Aunt Martha greeted her with a brief hug and a practical assessment of her appearance. "You look thin," Martha said, ushering her inside. "We'll fix that. Room and board in exchange for help running the place. I've got 4 regulars staying here, all respectable men who work honest jobs. Supper is at 6, breakfast at dawn. No funny business under my roof." Delilah nodded, grateful for the straightforward arrangement. She wanted work to fill her hours, tasks to occupy her hands and mind. She wanted to stop thinking about Philadelphia, about the pitying looks and the cruel laughter. She wanted loneliness, silence, peace through isolation. The first week passed in a blur of cooking and cleaning. Delilah learned the rhythms of the boarding house, the preferences of the residents. Mr. Henderson liked his coffee black and strong. Mr. Wilkins took his eggs scrambled. Young Timothy Porter, barely 19 and working at the general store, ate whatever was put in front of him with enthusiastic appreciation. Then there was Carter Freeman. He arrived on her 8th day in St. Joseph, riding into the small yard behind the boarding house on a bay mare, his hat pulled low against the afternoon sun. Delilah was hanging laundry when she heard the horse whinny and turned to see him dismounting with easy grace. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. When he tipped his hat to her, she caught sight of warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners, suggesting he smiled often. "Afternoon, miss," he said, his voice a pleasant drawl. "I'm looking for Martha Brennan's boarding house." "You found it," Delilah replied, keeping her tone neutral. "Are you seeking a room? If she's got one available. I'll be working at the Fletcher Ranch for the season, driving cattle." Long ride out there and back every day, figured staying in town made more sense. Martha appeared on the back porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Carter Freeman, as I live and breathe. Heard you were back in these parts." "Yes, madam. Spent the last 2 years down in Texas, but Missouri's home." "Mr. Fletcher offered me work and I accepted." "Well, I've got the room facing the street, 2nd floor, same rate as before. I'll take it." And just like that, Carter Freeman became part of Delilah's daily existence. She tried to maintain her distance, tried to keep her interactions with all the boarders brief and professional. But Carter made it difficult. He had a way of appearing exactly where she was working, offering to carry heavy buckets of water or reach items stored on high shelves. He asked questions about her day, seemed genuinely interested in her answers. When she gave him short, clipped responses, he simply smiled and tried again the next day. "You don't have to be so friendly," she told him one morning after he'd complimented her biscuits for the third time. "I know I don't have to be," Carter replied, pouring himself more coffee. "I want to be. Is that a problem? I'm here to work, Mr. Freeman, not to make friends. Call me Carter. And working and being friendly aren't mutually exclusive, Miss Ashford." She turned away, uncomfortable with how his easy manner seemed to slip past her carefully constructed walls. She had come here expecting loneliness, prepared for it, even welcomed it. Having someone try to break through her isolation felt dangerous, but Carter persisted in his gentle way. He left wildflowers on the kitchen table, claiming he'd found them growing by the road and thought they might brighten the place. He fixed the squeaky board on the back porch without being asked. He made Mr. Henderson laugh with stories about his cattle driving days, and even stern, Martha seemed to soften around him. "That boy is sunshine personified," Martha remarked one evening after Carter had entertained the supper table with a tale about a bull that had developed an inexplicable fondness for a particular cowhand's hat. Delilah said nothing, scrubbing dishes with more force than necessary. 2 weeks after Carter's arrival, Delilah went to the general store for supplies. The proprietor's wife, Mrs. Calhoun, was a notorious gossip, and Delilah usually tried to complete her transactions quickly to avoid conversation. But this time, Mrs. Calhoun was too eager to share news. "I hear you've got Carter Freeman staying at Martha's place," she said, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Fine-looking man, that one. Surprised some woman hasn't snatched him up yet." "I wouldn't know," Delilah replied, counting out coins for flour and sugar. "He was sweet on Emma Richardson a few years back, before she married that banker from Kansas City. Broke his heart from what I heard, but he seems to have recovered nicely." Mrs. Calhoun leaned closer. "Word is, he's been asking questions about you around town." Delilah's stomach tightened. "What kind of questions?" "Oh, nothing improper. Just where you came from, how long you're staying. He seems interested if you ask me." "Well, no one did ask you," Delilah said more sharply than intended. She gathered her purchases and left, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't want anyone asking questions about her. She didn't want anyone's interest or attention. She certainly didn't want Carter Freeman's warm smiles and thoughtful gestures working their way under her skin. That evening, after the supper dishes were washed and put away, Delilah stepped onto the front porch for a breath of air. The September evening had brought cooler temperatures, and she wrapped her arms around herself, watching the last light fade from the sky. Carter emerged from the house a few minutes later, coffee cup in hand. He settled into one of the porch chairs without asking permission, his long legs stretched out before him. "Nice evening," he said. "Yes. You ever going to tell me why you're so determined to be miserable?" The question caught her off guard. She turned to look at him, ready to deliver a cutting remark, but the genuine concern in his expression stopped her. "I'm not trying to be miserable," she said finally. "I'm trying to be left alone." Those aren't the same thing, but they often lead to the same place. He sipped his coffee, gazing out at the darkening street. "I spent 6 months alone on a cattle drive once. Just me and a herd of stubborn longhorns. Thought I wanted the solitude, the silence. Turned out what I really wanted was to run away from disappointing my father. And did the solitude help? No. It just gave me too much time to think. Drove me half crazy, actually. Started talking to the cows, which is never a good sign." He glanced at her, a small smile playing at his lips. "What are you running from, Delilah?" The use of her first name felt intimate, too familiar. But somehow she didn't mind it from him. Humiliation, she heard herself say. Public scandal and private heartbreak. Someone hurt you. Someone betrayed me. And everyone I knew seemed to enjoy watching me suffer through it. Carter was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry that happened to you, but St. Joseph isn't Philadelphia, and I'm not whoever made you want to hide from the world. I know that. Do you? Because you're acting like kindness is dangerous, like if you let yourself be happy for even a moment, something terrible will happen. Delilah felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. Maybe that's because that's been my experience. Then your experience has been with the wrong people. He stood, setting his empty cup on the porch railing. Before she could respond, he tipped his hat to her and went back inside, leaving her alone with thoughts that tumbled over each other like storm clouds. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Delilah admitted to herself that she was drawn to Carter Freeman. His easy laughter, his thoughtful gestures, the way he treated everyone around him with genuine respect and kindness. She was drawn to him, and that terrified her. She had trusted Marcus completely, had believed he loved her, and that trust had been shattered. How could she possibly risk her heart again? But over the following weeks, Carter's presence in her life became harder to resist. He seemed to understand when she needed space and when she needed companionship. He made her laugh despite herself, with stories about ranch mishaps and clever observations about their fellow boarders. He helped her carry water from the well each morning, and they fell into an easy routine of working side by side in comfortable silence. One afternoon, in early October, Martha announced she needed to visit her sister in Independence for a few days. Delilah can manage things here. The men know how to behave themselves. The first evening alone with the boarders passed without incident. Delilah served supper, washed dishes, and retreated to her room early. But on the second night, as she was cleaning up after the meal, she heard raised voices from the front parlor. She found Mr. Henderson and Timothy Porter in a heated argument over a card game. Henderson had been drinking, which wasn't unusual, but he'd apparently accused Timothy of cheating. "I want what you owe me, boy," Henderson said, his words slurred. "I didn't cheat and I don't owe you anything," Timothy replied, his young face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You calling me a liar, gentlemen," Delilah said, stepping between them. "This is inappropriate. Mr. Henderson, you've been drinking. I suggest you retire for the evening." Henderson turned his bleary gaze on her. "This isn't your concern, girl. This is between men. This is my aunt's house, which makes it my concern. Please go to your room." Henderson took a step toward her, and suddenly Carter was there, materializing from the dining room where he'd been reading. He didn't touch Henderson, but his presence was enough to make the older man stop. "You heard the lady," Carter said quietly. "Time to call it a night." Henderson looked between them, seemed to calculate his chances, and decided discretion was the better choice. He muttered something under his breath and stumbled toward the stairs. Timothy exhaled shakily. "Thank you, Miss Ashford. I swear I wasn't cheating. I don't even know how to cheat at cards." "I believe you," she said gently. "Perhaps no more card games with Mr. Henderson, though." After Timothy left, Delilah realized her hands were trembling. Carter touched her elbow lightly. "You handled that well," he said. "I was terrified, didn't show. But Henderson's usually harmless when he's drunk, just bitter and mean with his words. Thank you for backing me up, always." He said it simply, like a promise. They stood there in the parlor, oil lamps casting warm shadows on the walls. Delilah was acutely aware of how close Carter stood, how solid and reliable his presence felt. "Can I ask you something?" Carter said. "You're going to regardless of my answer." He smiled. "Fair point. Why did you really come to St. Joseph?" She considered deflecting, maintaining her walls. But those walls felt less necessary around Carter, less like protection and more like prisons. "I was engaged to a man in Philadelphia." Found him with my cousin 2 weeks before our wedding. The scandal was quite entertaining for everyone except me. My parents suggested I leave town until the gossip died down. I'm sorry. Everyone says that, but no one means it. They're just glad it happened to me and not to them. I mean it, Carter said, his brown eyes serious. You deserved better than that. You deserve someone who sees how special you are and wouldn't dream of looking elsewhere. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. You don't really know me. I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met. I know you're kind to young Timothy even when you're exhausted. I know you leave extra biscuits out for Mr. Wilkins because he's too shy to ask for more. I know you stand up to drunk men twice your size even when you're scared. He paused. I know when you forget to guard yourself, you have the most beautiful smile I've ever seen. Carter, I know you came here expecting loneliness, but Delilah, you don't have to be lonely, not if you don't want to be. She wanted to argue, to push him away, to retreat behind her carefully constructed defenses. Instead, she found herself asking, "What do you want from me?" Just a chance. A chance to make you smile more often. A chance to show you that not everyone will hurt you. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. A chance to fill your days with something other than work and your nights with something other than worry. That's a lot to ask, I know, but I'm a patient man. When Martha returned 3 days later, she took one look at Delilah and Carter and shook her head with a knowing smile. Well, something's shifted around here. I don't know what you mean, Delilah said, focusing intently on the bread dough she was kneading. Child, I may be old, but I'm not blind. That boy looks at you like you hung the moon and you don't flinch away from him anymore. We're friends, if that's what you want to call it. Martha patted her shoulder. Just be careful with your heart, dear, but not so careful that you forget to live. As October gave way to November, the weather turned colder, and Delilah found herself spending more time with Carter. He taught her to play chess in the evenings, though she suspected he let her win occasionally. They took walks around town on Sunday afternoons, and he pointed out landmarks, told her stories about growing up in Missouri. He made her laugh with his impressions of the various ranch animals and his tales of cowboys who were better at riding horses than talking to people. That's you, isn't it? She teased. Better with horses than people. Horses are easier. They don't expect you to say the right thing all the time, but no, I'm passable with people. You seem to tolerate me at least. I do more than tolerate you. Is that so? His eyes lit up with pleasure. Don't let it go to your head. But it was too late. His grin was wide and genuine, and she couldn't help smiling back. The night of the first real snowfall, Delilah woke to find the world transformed into white silence. She stood at her window, watching flakes drift past in lazy spirals, and felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in months, the tightness that had lived there began to ease. She found Carter in the kitchen before dawn, making coffee. He'd been up early preparing for a long day of bringing cattle down from the high pastures before the weather worsened. "You should eat something before you go," she said, moving to the stove. "I will if you'll sit with me while I eat." She fixed eggs and bacon, toasted bread, and sat across from him at the small kitchen table. In the pre-dawn darkness, with only a single lamp for light, the moment felt intimate and precious. "Be careful out there," she said. "The snow can be dangerous. I've worked in worse weather. But I appreciate your concern." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "Delilah, when I get back tonight, I'd like to talk to you about something." "What about?" "About where this is going, about what we're doing." He squeezed her hand gently. "About whether you feel what I feel." Her heart hammered. "And what do you feel?" "Like I've been waiting for you my whole life without knowing it." Before she could respond, footsteps sounded on the stairs. Mr. Wilkins appeared, yawning and looking for his morning coffee. The moment dissolved, but Carter's words stayed with Delilah all day. She went through her chores in a daze, her mind replaying every conversation, every smile, every casual touch she and Carter had shared over the past months. She had been so determined to protect herself, so certain that isolation was safety. But Carter had quietly, persistently shown her another way. He had filled her days with laughter, with stories and silly jokes and genuine interest in her thoughts. He had filled her nights with peace, knowing he was just upstairs, a steady presence in her chaotic world. And somewhere along the way she had fallen in love with him. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. Carter returned as evening fell, covered in snow and exhausted. He cleaned up and ate the supper she'd kept warm for him, but the house was full of people, and they had no chance to talk privately. After the meal, as she washed dishes, he dried them beside her, their shoulders occasionally brushing. "Meet me on the porch after everyone goes to bed," he murmured. She nodded. The waiting was agony. She put away the last dish, checked that the fires were banked properly, and finally slipped out onto the front porch. The snow had stopped and stars glittered in the clear, cold sky. Carter was already there, leaning against the railing, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "You came," he said. "You asked me to. You could have said no." "I could have." She moved to stand beside him, looking out at the snow-covered street. "But I didn't want to." He turned to face her fully. "Delilah, I need you to know something. I'm not a rich man. I've got some money saved, and Mr. Fletcher has offered me a position as his foreman come spring, which means steady work and decent pay. But I can't offer you the life you had in Philadelphia. No fancy parties or society gatherings. I don't want that life. It was never really mine anyway. I was just playing a part, trying to be what everyone expected." "Then what do you want?" She met his gaze, her heart pounding. "I want honesty. I want someone who sees me, really sees me, not some idealized version they've created in their head. I want laughter and peace and a life that feels real. I can give you that. I want to give you that." He took her hands in his calloused palms warm against her cold fingers. "I'm in love with you, Delilah. Have been for weeks now. Maybe from the moment I saw you hanging laundry with this determined look on your face, like you were daring the world to bother you." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears. "I love you too. I tried not to. I was so scared of being hurt again. I know. And I can't promise I'll never disappoint you or that we won't have hard times. But I can promise I'll never betray you. I can promise I'll work every day to make you happy, to make you feel safe and cherished. That's all I need." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and it felt nothing like the kisses she'd shared with Marcus. Those had been performances, carefully choreographed displays of affection. This was real, raw, honest. This was coming home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless from cold and emotion, Carter kept his arms around her. "Marry me," he said. "I know it's fast and we can wait if you want, but marry me, Delilah. Let me spend the rest of my life making you smile." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." He picked her up and spun her around, his laughter echoing in the quiet night. When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools. "We should probably go inside before we freeze to death," she said practically. "Probably. But first, one more kiss." She happily obliged. They were married 3 weeks later, on a bright December morning in the small church at the center of St. Joseph. Martha stood as Delilah's witness, her eyes bright with tears. Mr. Fletcher, Carter's boss, served as his best man. The other boarders attended, even Mr. Henderson, who surprisingly gave Delilah a gruff but sincere congratulation. Delilah wore a simple blue dress, and Carter wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed. The ceremony was brief, the vows traditional, but when Carter slipped the plain gold band onto her finger, Delilah felt something settle deep in her soul. This was right. This was real. They spent their wedding night in a room at the hotel, a luxury Carter insisted on despite Delilah's protests that it was an unnecessary expense. But as she lay in his arms, warm and safe and loved, she was grateful for the privacy, for this perfect bubble of happiness they'd created. "What are you thinking?" Carter asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "That I came here expecting to be alone forever, that I was so sure isolation was the only way to protect myself from more pain. And now I think I was wrong. Loneliness isn't safety. It's just another kind of prison." She turned to look at him, her hand resting over his heart. "You gave me something I didn't even know I needed. You filled my days with joy and my nights with peace. You made me feel alive again. You did the same for me. I was just going through the motions before you, working and drifting and telling myself I was content. But I wasn't, not really." He kissed her forehead. "You make everything mean something." They spent the winter in a small house Carter rented on the edge of town, close enough to the Fletcher ranch that he could get to work easily. It was modest, just 3 rooms and a loft, but it was theirs. Delilah made curtains and cooked meals and learned how to manage a household without servants. Carter worked long days but always came home to her, always greeted her with a kiss and asked about her day. They established routines and rituals. Saturday mornings meant sleeping late and making breakfast together, working side by side in their small kitchen. Sunday afternoons were for visiting Martha or taking walks through town. Evenings were spent by the fire, reading or talking or simply sitting in comfortable silence. In January, a letter arrived from Philadelphia. Delilah's mother wrote that Marcus had married someone else, a young woman with a larger dowry and fewer opinions. The wedding had been a grand affair. The gossip columns suggested they were very happy. Delilah read the letter aloud to Carter, her voice steady. When she finished, he looked up from the saddle he was mending. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Grateful," she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "If Marcus hadn't betrayed me, I never would have come here. I never would have met you. I'd be married to a man who didn't truly love me, living a life that made me miserable, and I wouldn't even know there was another way." "So you're saying I should thank him?" "Absolutely not. But I'm saying everything happened exactly as it needed to." Carter set aside his work and pulled her into his lap. "I love you, Mrs. Freeman. I love you too." Spring came early that year, melting the snow and turning the world green and alive. True to his word, Mr. Fletcher promoted Carter to foreman, which meant better pay and more responsibility. It also meant longer hours during the busy season, but Delilah didn't mind. She had her own work to occupy her time. Martha's health had been declining, and she asked Delilah to take over more of the boarding house management. Delilah agreed, and between running the boarding house and managing her own home, her days were full and productive. One evening in late April, as Carter washed up after a long day of working with the new calves, Delilah realized her monthly courses were late. She'd been feeling odd for a week, queasy in the mornings and unusually tired. She waited another few days to be sure, then shared the news with Carter over supper. "I think I'm pregnant," she said quietly. His fork clattered to his plate. "You think?" "I'm fairly certain. The timing is right and I feel different." Joy spread across his face like sunrise. "We're having a baby." "Yes, I believe so." He was around the table in an instant, pulling her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby, we're having a baby. Are you happy?" She asked, even though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." "Delilah, you've given me everything. A home, a purpose, love, and now a child. I don't know what I did to deserve this, but I'm grateful every single day." The pregnancy progressed normally, though the summer heat made Delilah uncomfortable. Carter fussed over her, insisting she rest more, bringing her cool water and fanning her when the temperatures soared. Martha was delighted by the news and had already started knitting baby blankets. In October, just over a year after that first snowfall when Delilah had realized she loved Carter, she went into labor. The birth was long and difficult, attended by the town doctor and Martha, who held Delilah's hand and murmured encouragement. Carter paced downstairs, wearing a path in the wooden floor, until finally, just before dawn, he heard the thin wail of a newborn. Martha appeared at the top of the stairs, her face tired but radiant. "You have a son." Carter took the stairs 2 at a time. Delilah lay propped against pillows, exhausted but smiling, holding a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up as he entered, and the love in her eyes took his breath away. "Come meet your son," she said softly. He approached carefully, as if afraid he might break something, and looked down at the tiny face peeking from the blanket. The baby had wisps of dark hair and a serious expression, his little fists waving in the air. "He's perfect," Carter whispered. "You're both perfect." "We thought we might name him James, after your father," Delilah said. Carter's eyes filled with tears. His father had passed away the previous winter, and while their relationship had been complicated, he'd been working on mending things before the old man died. "He would have been honored," Carter managed to say. Baby James was a good-natured child who rarely cried and seemed content to observe the world with solemn eyes. Carter proved to be a devoted father, getting up for nighttime feedings without complaint, singing silly songs to make James smile, carrying him around their small house and explaining everything they saw. "He can't understand you," Delilah said one evening, watching Carter show James the stars through the window. "Not yet. But someday he will, and I want him to know his papa was always talking to him, always including him in things." Her heart swelled with love for this good, kind man she'd married. The years that followed were filled with both challenges and joys. The ranch work was hard, and there were seasons when money was tight. Delilah continued helping Martha with the boarding house until Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72. She left the boarding house to Delilah, who decided to sell it rather than try to manage it with a young child. The money from the sale allowed them to purchase a small plot of land from Mr. Fletcher and build a proper house. Nothing fancy but solid and spacious, with room for their growing family. When James was 3, Delilah gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret, with her mother's blonde hair and her father's warm eyes. 2 years later, another son arrived, whom they named Thomas. The house was full of noise and laughter, chaos and love. Carter proved to be as good a father as he was a husband. He played with his children, told them stories, taught them about horses and cattle and the land they lived on. He never raised his voice in anger, though he was firm when necessary. He showed them through his actions what it meant to be honest and hardworking and kind. Delilah watched him with their children and fell more in love with him every day. The man who had promised to fill her days with laughter and her nights with peace had kept his word 1,000 times over. Yes, there were hard days. There were times when the children were sick, or the weather destroyed crops, or money worries kept them awake at night. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Carter took Delilah on a picnic to the place where he'd proposed, back behind the boarding house that now belonged to someone else. It was summer, the air thick and warm, cicadas singing in the trees. "You ever regret it?" Carter asked, unpacking the basket of food Delilah had prepared. Leaving Philadelphia, marrying a cowboy, living this life. Never, she said without hesitation. Do you? Only that I didn't find you sooner, that you had to go through that pain before we met. The pain made me who I am. And who I am is someone who knows how lucky she is, who doesn't take this life for granted. She leaned over and kissed him. I love you, Carter Freeman. I love the life we've built, the family we've made. I wouldn't change a single thing. Not even the time Thomas put a frog in your bread dough. She laughed. Okay, I might change that one thing. They sat together, eating and talking and watching clouds drift across the blue sky, comfortable in a silence that spoke of deep understanding. After all these years, they still made each other laugh. After all these years, she still felt peace when he held her at night. I was thinking, Carter said, about what you said all those years ago, about coming here expecting loneliness, I remember. I'm glad you were wrong. I'm glad you let me prove you wrong. So am I. As they rode home in the wagon, the afternoon sun warm on their faces, Delilah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd arrived in St. Joseph broken and determined to hide from the world. She'd expected isolation, maybe even welcomed it. Instead, she'd found a man who refused to let her disappear, who saw her pain and didn't run from it, who showed her through patience and kindness that love didn't have to hurt. The years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and holidays, school plays and church socials, first steps and first words and all the small miracles of raising children. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and wanted to be a teacher. Margaret was spirited and adventurous, always climbing trees and racing her brothers. Thomas was the comedian of the family, always trying to make people laugh. When James turned 15, Mr. Fletcher offered Carter a partnership in the ranch. It was a shocking, generous offer that spoke to how much the older man valued Carter's work and integrity. Carter discussed it with Delilah for weeks, weighing the risks and rewards. It's a big decision, Delilah said, but I trust you, I trust us. If you think we can do this, then I'm with you. They accepted the partnership, and suddenly their lives changed in ways both exciting and terrifying. They had more responsibility, more risk, but also more opportunity. Carter worked even longer hours, but he made sure to always be home for supper, to spend time with his children, to never neglect his family in pursuit of success. Delilah took on the financial management of their household portion of the ranch, discovering she had a talent for numbers and planning. She kept meticulous records and made suggestions that often saved them money or increased efficiency. Carter relied on her judgment and always consulted her before making major decisions. We're partners, he said. In everything. I'd be lost without you. When Delilah turned 40, she stood in her kitchen early one morning, watching through the window as Carter showed Thomas how to properly saddle a horse. Margaret was helping with the chickens, her laughter carrying across the yard. James had left for university the previous fall, pursuing his dream of becoming a teacher, and the house felt slightly empty without him. But it was a good emptiness, the kind that came from watching your children grow into their own lives. She and Carter had given them roots and wings, security and freedom. Their children knew they were loved, knew they could come home anytime, but they weren't afraid to venture out into the world. The kitchen door opened, and Carter stepped inside, his boots dusty from the morning's work. He was older now, his dark hair streaked with silver, lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. But he was still handsome, still strong, and when he looked at her, his eyes still held that same warmth that had drawn her in all those years ago. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, moving to pour himself coffee. "About how far we've come. About how different my life turned out from what I expected. Better or worse, so much better. Carter, I never imagined I could be this happy. That happiness like this even existed. He set down his cup and pulled her into his arms. You saved me too, you know. I was content enough before you, going through the motions. But you gave me purpose beyond work. You gave me a reason to build something that would last. They stood there in their kitchen, holding each other as morning light streamed through the windows, and Delilah thought about the girl who'd stepped off the stage coach all those years ago. That girl had been so scared, so hurt, so determined to never risk her heart again. She'd come west expecting loneliness to be her companion for the rest of her days. Instead, she'd found a cowboy with kind eyes and an easy smile who filled her days with laughter and her nights with peace. She'd found a love that was steady and true, that weathered storms and celebrated joys. She'd built a life she'd never dreamed possible. I love you, she whispered against his chest. I love you too. Always have, always will. Over the years, their partnership in the ranch grew and prospered. They purchased adjacent land, expanded their cattle operation, and hired several hands to help with the work. Carter's reputation for fairness and honesty spread throughout the region, and people sought him out for advice on ranching and business matters. Delilah became known for her hospitality, opening their home for community gatherings and church events. She mentored younger women in the area, teaching them about managing household finances and finding their own strength. She never forgot how Martha had given her a chance when she'd needed it most, and she tried to pay that kindness forward. James graduated from university and secured a teaching position in Kansas City. He married a lovely young woman named Sarah, and they gave Delilah and Carter their first grandchild, a boy they named Carter after his grandfather. Margaret surprised everyone by becoming interested in ranching and working alongside her father and Thomas. She had a gift with horses and eventually started breeding and training them. Thomas, true to his nature, became a veterinarian, combining his love of animals with his desire to help people and their livestock. When Delilah turned 50, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children ran through the house and yard, grandchildren now adding to the noise and chaos. Carter grilled steaks. James and his family came from Kansas City, and even some of the old boarders who were still alive made the journey to celebrate. As Delilah looked around at all the faces, at the life they'd built together, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She slipped away from the party for a moment, walking to the small garden she maintained behind the house. Carter found her there a few minutes later. "You okay?" he asked. "More than okay. Just needed a moment to take it all in." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood together in comfortable silence, watching their family through the window. "You remember the night you proposed?" Delilah asked. "What you said about filling my days and nights?" "I remember every word of that night. You kept your promise. You've kept it every single day since. It wasn't hard. Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done." She turned in his arms to face him. They'd changed so much over the years, their faces lined with age, their bodies softer and slower. But the love between them had only deepened, becoming something solid and unshakable. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not giving up on me when I was determined to push everyone away. For seeing past my defenses to who I really was. For showing me that love could be safe and good and real. You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to. I'm glad it was you." They returned to the party hand in hand, and Delilah caught Margaret watching them with a soft smile. Her daughter approached later when the party was winding down. "You and Papa," Margaret said. "You have something special. I hope I find something like that someday." "You will," Delilah assured her. When you're ready and when the right person comes along, don't settle for less than what you deserve. Wait for someone who makes you laugh, who gives you peace, who sees you for who you really are. That's what Papa does for you. Yes, every single day. The years continued their steady march forward. Mr. Fletcher passed away at the age of 85, leaving his portion of the ranch to Carter in his will, along with a letter thanking him for his years of loyal service and friendship. Carter cried when he read it, touched by the old man's generosity and trust. Thomas got married to a woman named Lucy, a teacher's daughter with a sharp wit and a kind heart. They settled on a small piece of land near the main ranch, and Lucy opened a small surgery where she assisted Thomas with his veterinary practice. Margaret eventually fell in love with a cowhand named Daniel who worked on their ranch. Carter liked him immediately, recognizing in the younger man the same dedication and honesty that he valued. They were married in a simple ceremony on the ranch, and Margaret continued working with the horses, now with Daniel by her side. Through it all, Delilah and Carter remained the steady center of their family. They celebrated grandchildren's birthdays, helped out when illness struck, offered advice when asked and wisdom when needed. Their love story became legend in the family, the tale of how Grandma had arrived expecting loneliness, and Grandpa had filled her life with joy instead. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Carter insisted on recreating their first date, a picnic and walk around town. They were older and slower now, but they made the walk, laughing at memories and marveling at how the town had grown and changed. "You know what I love most about our life together?" Carter asked as they sat on a bench near the church where they'd married. "Tell me." "That we still like each other. After 30 years, 3 kids, grandchildren, business ups and downs, good times and hard times, I still enjoy your company more than anyone else's. I still want to tell you about my day and hear about yours. I still think you're the most interesting, beautiful, remarkable woman I've ever met." Tears slipped down Delilah's cheeks. "I feel the same way. You're my best friend, Carter. You always have been. Here's to 30 more years. I'll take however many we get, as long as they're with you." They kissed, right there on the bench in the middle of town, and didn't care who saw them. The next decade brought more changes. They gradually turned over more of the ranch operations to Thomas and Margaret, though Carter still went out most days to check on things and offer guidance. Delilah finally started writing down some of the stories Carter had told her over the years, thinking maybe the grandchildren would enjoy reading about their grandfather's adventures. James became a principal at his school. Sarah continued teaching, and their children grew into young adults. More grandchildren arrived, filling holidays with noise and joy. The ranch continued to prosper under the careful management of the next generation. When Carter turned 65, he and Delilah took a trip back to Philadelphia. It was her first time returning since she'd left in shame all those years ago. She'd kept in touch with a few friends through letters, and they'd invited her to visit. Walking the familiar streets felt surreal. So much had changed, yet so much remained the same. They visited the church where she was supposed to have married Marcus, walked past her parents' old house, now owned by someone else, and toured the neighborhoods where she'd grown up. "Does it feel strange being back?" Carter asked. "Not strange exactly. More like visiting a place I used to know in a dream. It doesn't feel real anymore. It doesn't feel like it was ever my life." They met with some of her old friends who were curious about the cowboy she'd married and the life she'd built out west. Delilah showed them photographs of her children and grandchildren, told stories about the ranch, and watched as they realized she was genuinely happy. One of her former friends, Elizabeth, pulled her aside before they left. "I always wondered what happened to you," Elizabeth admitted. After the scandal with Marcus, you just disappeared. Some people said you'd had a breakdown, that your family had sent you away in shame. I went away, yes, but not in shame, in hope of a fresh start. And you found it. I found so much more than that. I found myself. I found love that was real and true. I found a life worth living. Delilah smiled. The scandal was the best thing that ever happened to me. On the train back to Missouri, Carter held her hand and watched the landscape roll past. Any regrets about the visit? He asked. None. It was good to see that my old life really is over, that I've completely moved on. And it was good to show them I'm happy. Not for vindication, but just because it's true. You are happy, aren't you? Deliriously, are you? Every single day. They returned home to find that Margaret was pregnant with her fourth child, and Thomas had been asked to join the board of a regional cattlemen's association. The ranch was thriving, the family was healthy, and life continued its beautiful, chaotic pace. As Delilah approached 70, she began to slow down more noticeably. Her joints ached on cold mornings, and she tired more easily. But she still maintained her garden, still cooked Sunday dinners for whoever could make it, still sat on the porch with Carter every evening, watching the sun set over the land they'd built their life on. "What are you thinking about?" Carter asked one evening. It was a question he'd asked her thousands of times over their decades together. "About beginnings," she said. "About that young woman who stepped off the stagecoach expecting nothing but loneliness and isolation. She didn't know what was waiting for her. No. She didn't know that a persistent cowboy with kind eyes would refuse to let her hide. She didn't know that love could be gentle and steady and real." Carter reached over and took her hand, his grip still strong despite his own advancing age. That cowboy didn't know what he was getting either. Didn't know he'd find someone who'd make every day brighter, who'd be his partner in every sense of the word. We got lucky. We got blessed. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The house behind them was quiet now that it was just the two of them again, but it was a peaceful quiet, not a lonely one. Their children and grandchildren visited often, and the ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse were like extended family. "Carter," Delilah said after a while. "Yes. Thank you for my life. Thank you for showing me that everything I thought I knew about love was wrong. Thank you for every laugh, every conversation, every moment of peace. Thank you for our children and the life we built together." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy who didn't have much to offer except his heart. Your heart was everything I needed." As the years continued to pass, Delilah and Carter settled into a comfortable rhythm of aging together. They took daily walks around their property, reminisced about their decades together, and spoiled their grandchildren shamelessly. Carter still consulted on ranch matters, his experience and wisdom valued by Thomas and Margaret. Delilah continued writing down family stories, creating a legacy for future generations. On their 50th wedding anniversary, their entire family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. Children and grandchildren came from near and far, filling the house and yard with love and laughter. Margaret had organized everything, insisting her parents shouldn't lift a finger. During the dinner, James stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You taught us what real love looks like. Not the fairy tale kind that exists only in stories, but the everyday kind that shows up even when it's hard. The kind that lasts. Thank you for showing us how to build a life worth living, how to be partners, how to face challenges together. You've given us an incredible gift." Everyone raised their glasses, and Delilah found herself crying happy tears once again. Carter squeezed her hand under the table. Later, After most of the guests had left and only their children remained, Delilah found herself on the porch again with Carter, their favorite place to talk and think. 50 years, Carter marveled. Feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean. Sometimes I still feel like that young woman who was so scared to trust again. And then I look at everything we've built and realize decades have passed. Any advice you'd give that young woman if you could go back? Delilah thought about it. I'd tell her that being hurt doesn't mean you have to stop living. I'd tell her that the right person won't make you choose between safety and happiness, because they'll give you both. I'd tell her that love isn't about grand gestures, it's about showing up every day with honesty and kindness. She figured all that out eventually. Because you taught me. You were so patient with me, Carter. You never pushed, never demanded, just consistently showed me who you were and let me come to you in my own time. You were worth the wait. You're still worth everything. They sat together as night deepened around them, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. They'd weathered storms and celebrated joys. They'd raised children and built a business. They'd filled their days with laughter and their nights with peace, just as Carter had promised all those years ago, when they finally went inside, walking slower now but still hand in hand. Delilah paused to look back at the yard, the barns, the land stretching into darkness. What is it? Carter asked, just taking it in, making sure I remember every detail of this perfect day. We'll have more perfect days, I know, but each one is precious. They climbed the stairs to their bedroom, the same room they'd shared for decades. Carter helped Delilah with her necklace, a gesture he'd performed thousands of times. She helped him with his collar buttons, another small ritual of their shared life. As they lay in bed, Delilah nestled against Carter's side, her head on his shoulder. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. Always have, always will. She smiled in the darkness, feeling safe and cherished and completely at peace. This was what she'd needed all along, what she'd been too hurt and scared to believe she could have. Not a perfect life free from challenges, but a partner to face those challenges with. Not constant happiness, but someone who brought joy even on the hardest days. Not isolation to protect her heart, but connection that made her heart whole. Carter Freeman had filled her days with laughter, teaching her to find humor and lightness even when life was hard. He'd filled her nights with peace, being the steady presence that let her rest deeply, knowing she was safe and loved. He'd given her a life beyond her wildest dreams, and she'd given him the same in return. As sleep pulled her under, Delilah's last conscious thought was gratitude for the path that had led her here, for every choice and circumstance that had brought her to St. Joseph, to Martha's boarding house, to Carter. She'd come expecting loneliness and found love instead. She'd come running from heartbreak and found healing. She'd come prepared to hide from the world and instead had built a life rich with connection and meaning. The years ahead would bring more changes. Eventually, they would slow down even more, rely more on their children, face the inevitable challenges of aging. But they would face everything together, just as they always had. And when their time finally came to leave this world, they would do that together too. Their love story complete but never forgotten, passed down through generations as proof that sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them, and that opening your heart to love, even after it's been broken, is always worth the risk. But that was all in the future. For now, in this perfect moment, Delilah Ashford Freeman slept peacefully in the arms of the cowboy who'd changed her life, surrounded by the legacy of the love they'd built together, and dreamed sweet dreams of all the tomorrows still to come.